and hunters and trapper organizations to have a meeting at lunch. So just to let you all know that please stay at lunchtime for a little bit for a meeting, and Willie has asked for it. So I'll let the rest of that meeting go with you. Okay? Okay. Our daily housekeeping I'll do today. Exit is up here if it's the closest. The other exit is at the back, which is where you came in. Snacks are at the back by that exit. Washrooms are out that exit and across the hall. And there is a big thanks to those that brought the country food today. Yeah. You don't see it yet, but it is back there. But it will be put out a little bit later. Okay. Let's get started. And we have our list from last time. The list was Martha, Willie, Paula, and Richard. And we will start with that. And as before, please keep the questions to the land use plan that's been presented and the federal government's presentation. Thank you. And go back to the list. Martha, you're up first.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Martha Hicks from Hamlet of Rankin Inlet. I have two questions. One is, when I worked for Department of Indian and Northern Affairs back in the early 80s, the department used to do land use inspections of old mine sites and exploration camps. I'm just wondering if they're still doing that.
Thank you for the question. Please go ahead, Terry.
Thank
you, Chair.
Yes, but I will say that obviously because of COVID, it was difficult for us to do so in the past couple of years, but we've started it up again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The second question, Martha?
Second question is, Fisheries and Oceans used to do fish counts in the 80s, again, early 80s. I'm wondering if they're still doing that fish count.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Martha.
I believe they still are, and that it's usually in partnership with Inuit. But what I'll do is, considering we don't have anyone from DFO here right now, I'll pose that same question and we'll provide a written response to the Commission. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, I asked that because there's a shack up at Diane River and they used to use that for fish count. Seems to be abandoned forever, so that's why I was asking.
Thank you, Martha. We will go on to the next question, and it will be coming from Willie. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Willie Nakalak, Mayor. Cole Harbor.
Terry,
I have a question and a general comment. Our chair has been advising us the agenda in front of us. I just want to stress that we are not sticking to the agenda. I saw a sloop coming into the Kibalek region from overseas. Who does give permission for travel to Canadian waters? There were from Poland. Who is responsible? Which department is responsible for vessels entering Canadian waters? I'm worried about vessels coming in unannounced. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry.
Thank you, Chair. A question from Willie.
I'll have Jaydeep respond to that question, if the Chair permits.
Thank you. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning. Jaydeep Johar, Transport Canada. The ships which come to the Canadian Arctic are monitored throughout. Before they come to our waters, at least 96 hours before they come to our waters, they let Transport Canada know of their arrival, of their crew, of their destination. We look at the vessel's particulars from the security perspective, and if we find any deficiencies or any concerns with regards to the security of the vessel, we will follow up with the vessel. Also, as the vessels enter close to the Canadian Arctic, they are required to report to Transport Canada and Coast Guard twice a day, including any defects they have. We have 24/7 duty officer who monitors traffic in the Arctic in conjunction with the Coast Guard. So to summarize, all the ships which come to the Arctic are monitored very closely, and if Transport Canada finds that they are in any contravention, we have the powers to ask the vessels to leave our waters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Willie, a follow-up?
Thank you, Chair. The answer. And the other item, 1021. The ships traveling through Southampton and Coach Island has been a problem for some times. We have many marine calving areas in our region, and the Coast Guard are also traveling through Southampton and Coach Island. Someone called me this summer, so I Googled it, and it's a Coast Guard ship. As we've been stressing for a few days, we have a lot of mammals, walrus haulouts near Coral Harbor. Walrus is one of our main food. And I like to let Coast Guard for, I think, what we've been asking for with marine traffic. It could be one of the Coast Guard infractions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank
you, Chair. Terry,
Regional Director, General
Outreach.
Crown Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs, Canada. If the chair permits, I'll have Jaydeep respond to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Jaydeep Johar, Transport Canada. I understand and heard concerns throughout this session about the ships traveling between Coates Island and Southampton. I will take these concerns to the senior officials, and with regards to rerouting the vessels so that they don't go between these two islands. With regards to the Coast Guard, I'll make sure that I call my Coast Guard colleagues and ensure that they are made of these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Paula. Please go ahead, Paula.
Paula Kigulik-Hewson, Hamlet of Baker Lake. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair. My question to the Government of Canada, I have two questions. One with regards to contaminated sites. In the Hamlet municipal boundary of Baker Lake, we have old barrels from exploration camps, past camps, from probably the 60s, 70s, 80s. I've spoken to Indian and Northern Affairs Canada when it was that, I don't remember the new name now, Indigenous Affairs. I've forgotten your new acronym. Sorry. I've spoken to them about it or let them know. And then prior to being on council, now on council, we also have the old Kudluk Energy power plant, which used to be the NWT Northwest Territories Power Corp plant in the middle of town, and there's a big fuel spill there that goes all the way from that site all the way down to the shores. There's a little bit of remediation, but when they scooped it up, you could smell the fuel, and it's still like that. And then recently, we had a really big fuel spill in the middle of town with Petroleum Products Division. We, as the Hamlet Council, have asked Petroleum Products Division to have a land farm moved outside of the buildings of constituents and move it farther to the old landfill site, which It's in the process. It's just taking a very long time, but we told Petroleum Products Division that that's what we wanted, the land farm to be moved up there. But right now, the fuel spill contaminated stuff is sitting right beside the gas station, right beside the road, and the fumes and stuff there are affecting the health of our constituents. So some of this is, how do you say it? Old history, but still here. Contaminated sites and new sites within our municipal boundaries, and how do we get them cleaned up and shipped out? Thank you. I have another question after.
Thank you for that. I believe that would be something that you would follow up with Hamlet afterwards. Is that correct, Terry?
Thank
you, Chair. Your question, Paula.
We are aware of those discarded fuel drums out by the airport. I believe Mayor Oksani met with the minister as well in the late spring, and we are looking into it. Interestingly enough, one of my staff, Jeff, when he was a summer student, one of his summer jobs was crushing the other fuel drums for, I believe it was Arriva. But we're getting to the bottom of who's responsible, and it's going to be an ongoing investigation in that part. As for the other part of the old Northwest Territories Power Corporation, we are still looking into that, and we have been. I've reached out to my colleagues at the government of Nunavut and see what remedies may be available and see what we can do. And we're going to keep the Hamlet updated as we get more, and we'll be making sure that I'll be speaking to your SAO as well, or Senior Administrative Officer.
Thank you. And just as I've been doing all along, gentle reminder, keep the questions related to the land use plan and the presentation. And please go ahead, Paula.
Thank you, Uvanga Paula Kigiwilikiusin, Hamlet Baker Lake. Thank you, Vice Chair Mr. Sean Lester. My question is with regards to your annex, and I see Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC, is not here, I believe. Environment is very important to the plan, and as you heard from other delegates and myself, caribou are very important. Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife of Canada, COSEWIC, listed caribou, barren ground caribou population as threatened November 2016. It says it's to be reassessed in 5 years. The federal government sees that there is something going on with the caribou and that they're going down. I'm just curious why they're not here as part of your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead when you're ready, Terry.
Thank you, Chair.
The question was why Environment Canada, Climate Change are not present. They were in Cambridge Bay. Unfortunately, they're not here in Rankin. But if you have specific questions for them, I can try and provide some answers with respect to the caribou and the endangered species aspect of your question. And there's an acronym here, which is the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, COSWIC, which assessed barren ground caribou as threatened in 2016. The process is underway for a listing decision under Species at Risk Act, SARA. But I'll leave it at that for now, because I believe there wasn't a question specifically towards that, but more in line of why Environment Canada and climate change is not here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one addition.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Terry Audla, Crown Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs Canada. They are listening in, though, on the live stream and communicating with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ubangapala, Kigiwale Cusin, Hamada Baker Lake. Thank you, Terry Audla, Crown Indigenous Northern Affairs Canada, I think, for your answer. Considering the barren, we have the largest population of caribou in this region and in Canada, I think it was very important that they were here face to face for us, Inuit, us community reps who have questions, especially the hunter-trapper organizations, to be given an opportunity to ask questions to them as well, considering the biggest issues that seem to be for different parties is limited use for areas within the Kivalliq region. It would have been nice to hear them talk to us, and it's disheartening to hear that they went to Cambridge and didn't come here. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Did you want to say something, Terry?
Yes, just so that for Environment Canada, climate change, they were hoping to come here, but because of accommodations, weren't able to, unless we doubled or tripled up. But just so you're aware, for the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, assessed the barren ground caribou. The government of Canada is following due process for Species at Risk Act listings in Nunavut, which involves consultation with the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board and the various organizations that have direct impacts or influence on, prior to making any decision on listing for barren ground caribou. The land use plan could be one of the many tools to manage the decline of barren ground caribou through mitigating and avoiding impacts to barren ground caribou habitat. I'll leave it at that for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Richard, I believe you had a question? Okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Richard Laxani, Baker Lake Hunters and Trappers Organization. Good morning, everyone. Just a follow-up on a question that I asked regarding marine shipping yesterday. I just wanted clarification about this working group that was mentioned in regards to my question about anchorages. Who sits on this working group, and how are the members appointed to this working group? Is my question. I'm next about that.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry.
Thank you, Chair.
I'll hand that response over to JD if the Chair permits.
Thank you. Please go ahead when you're ready. Thanks.
Jaydeep Johar, Transport Canada. Thank you, Richard, for that question. This is an ad hoc working group. Whenever we receive a request for a change in anchorage or a new anchorage, we will work with our indigenous partners and Canadian Hydrographic Services, other involved government departments, so that the issues which are brought up with regards to change or a new proposed anchorage are distributed and heard between all the parties with rationale of why are we making those changes. You had mentioned that there are concerns with regards to vessels anchoring near Helicopter Island. We have exchanged information. My contact information is with you. Please feel free to text me, call me, or email me with regards to the concerns, and then I'll ensure that we work on that to find a suitable solution. It's a collaborative working group we have. And I just want to add something else. This collaborative approach really works. A classic example was yesterday when Richard got a call from JRCC, Joint Rescue Operations Center. Same time we were involved, and to make sure that a sick crew member from a vessel is taken ashore. This to provide you an example that there are working relationships already existing, and will ensure that we work together again to solve further issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Richard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Richard Aksani, Baker Lake Hunters and Trappers Organization, and thank you for that clarification. My next question, I guess it's a two-parter. Baker Lake is a very unique place. We're an inland community. We're the only inland community in Nunavut. And the federal waters end on the east side of Barber Bay. So I have two questions relating to this. My first question would be, as far as marine shipping, if a ship did get grounded, which department within the federal government would respond, knowing that in the region, I know Rankin Inlet has a Canadian Coast Guard auxiliary. Baker Lake being an inland community and out of federal waters, we don't have that capacity. So that's question number one. And question number two to that is, our constituents in Baker Lake rely on fish. When we want to do a fish stock assessment it's hard to try and get the support we need from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, because we're so far inland. We're given a runaround as to who would be able to support the community on counting the fish stocks and what fish are there. So that's my second question.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry.
Terry Outla, Crown Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs, Canada. I'll respond briefly to the second part of the question with respect to Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We'll take your question and we'll contact the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. There's still some jurisdiction involved with respect to the fish near Baker Lake or around Baker Lake or in Baker Lake. So we'll provide that to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and provide a response to that. As for the first part, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll have Mr. Jaydeep Johar from Transport Canada respond. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Jaydeep Johar, Transport Canada. Thanks, Richard, for your question. If the ship has an incident, for example, the incident you mentioned about grounding, immediately as soon as the vessel is aground, the captain is required to let the Coast Guard know, Transport Canada know. If there is a risk of pollution when the vessel is aground, or there is a pollution, the Canadian Coast Guard will take the lead for the vessel. Transport Canada will be providing assistance, technical assistance as required. The first and foremost thing is to ensure that the risk to environment is minimized. With regards to limited sources or resources to assist those vessels, we work and provide direction to the captain of the vessel to provide us with a towing salvage plan, which they might ask assistance from the nearby vessels or the Canadian Coast Guard. At the same time, we will have a Transport Canada inspector going to the site to inspect the vessel. Again, to summarize, any incident, including grounding, is taken very seriously, and all the departments, we work together to ensure that crew, safety of vessel, and there is minimum impact to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. We will move to registered participants at this time. Is there any questions from registered participants? If there is, please come to the mic. Close to the mic, please, and state your name and organization. Thank you.
Hello. Hilutagong Na, Friends of Land Use Planning. As Paula stated, the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada assessed the barren caribou as threatened. their definition of threatened. A wildlife species is likely to become endangered if nothing is done to reverse the factors leading to its extinction. What has the Government of Canada done upon receiving this recommendation?
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry.
Thank
you, Chair.
In my previous response to Paula from Hamanito, I'll sort of reiterate that the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada assessed Bering Ground Caribou. The Government of Canada is following due process for species at risk listings in Nunavut, with consultations with the appropriate wildlife management boards prior to making any decision on listing for Bering Ground Caribou. Dolphin and Union caribou proposed listing as endangered from special concern. The Nunavut Wildlife Management Board has posted the outcome of the listing decision process under the Nunavut Agreement. We are now waiting for the Minister to bring the recommendation to the Governor in Council. Until Governor in Council reviews and decides to amend the listing, the species remains listed as special concern under the Federal Species at Risk Act. This final step can generally take up to 2 years or longer. As for Bering Ground caribou, proposed listing to threatened from unlisted. The Nunavut land claim process related to the listing of Bering Ground caribou as threatened is still following the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board decision-making process and has not been posted to the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board decision registry. Similar to dolphin and Union caribou, after the decision is posted, the Minister again will bring the recommendation to the Governor in Council. Until Governor in Council reviews and confirms the listing decision, the species is not listed under the Federal Species at Risk Act. This final step can generally take, again, up to 2 years or longer after the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board process is complete.
Thank you. I believe you have a follow-up. Please go ahead.
I have other questions after this too. I just want to know in advance. But this is a follow-up to this question that I just asked, Matna Iksivauta, Matna Terry. If this recommendation moves the GOC to designate the Bering caribou under the Species at Risk Act, I have a couple questions that follow up to this. And a lead into it is we've seen by the graphs that were and the maps that were demonstrated yesterday from the government of Nunavut how in a short period of time of 23 years we could see a reduction of 49% in my area and considerably higher in many other areas of Bering Ground caribou. So my question is, first of all, if in a number of years the Species at Risk Act then designates the caribou as threatened or near extinct, whatever the designation may be, do you agree that habitat protection is required under the Species at Risk Act? And to add to that, would you not, as the Government of Canada, be proactive at this time and support a strong Nunavut land use plan that, through limited use areas, seeks protection for barren ground caribou?
Thank you for that. Please go ahead, Terry.
Goedenamiddag, Ichivotalik, Amalo Tan Persotok, hello. Terry Outla, Crown Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs, Canada. The Government of Canada recognizes the importance and complementary nature of both Inuit and scientific knowledge systems in the planning process. The Commission's broad planning policies, objectives, and goals state that land use planning relies on the best available Inuit Hayamayutohangit and scientific information as a basis for decisions. It is in the Government of Canada's view that important and vital information, whether scientific or from the insight of Inuit knowledge, should be considered in planning decisions with future generations in mind whenever it is available. And as set out in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the Government of Canada is committed to upholding the precautionary principle, which states that where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. So in the context of the Nunavut Land Use Plan, the Government of Canada believes it is important to consider the precautionary principle, particularly in areas where information gaps may arise in scientific or Inuit Hayamayutohangit. When selecting between various planning options that would provide a similar level of mitigation, it's also important to select the measure that least restricts economic opportunities. The Nunavut Land Use Plan is one of many tools available in Nunavut to prevent the risk of serious or irreversible environmental harm and to support a sustainable future for Nunavut Miut. And that I'll respond in that manner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
I'll just respond to your response. I almost wish we would just designate caribou under economic development because it provides food for all of us. Okay, and Inuit did help draft this land use plan. It's sad to see that economic development in the light of the Government of Canada will be first over caribou, even though you've received this designation. Moving on to my next question. The Government of Canada stands fast that all exploration, even if in the proposed land use, limited use areas will be grandfathered and therefore secured. And any areas identified for conservation, if already staked out by exploration, will be sterilized. Why won't the Government of Canada temporarily withdraw lands identified for limited use areas for staking?
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry.
Huyinami itivotalik malu tan pilsoto hilu. I never suggested economic development is paramount. Just to clarify that. And for identifying any species at risk, there are certain procedures and processes that we have to go through to ensure that we capture all Inuit Hayumituhangit and science and make sure that the correct decision is being made. So we'll provide sort of the process and procedure with respect to how we can get from where we are to where we should be with respect to caribou protection and mitigation measures. And then with respect to the other part of the question in the aspect of a moratorium until at such point that the plan is finalized and approved. I believe there was a request by letter to our minister back in 2016, and I'll just defer to the response from the minister because the government of Canada doesn't necessarily act alone when it comes to making that decision. The minister always held strongly that the partnership arrangements with Inuit organizations and the government of Nunavut to make that decision, and that's something that we'll provide again to the Commission as part of the response. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder to slow the speaking while you're asking the question so the interpreter can interpret. Please go ahead.
I'm just in response to, thank you, Iksibautak, thank you, Terry, just in response to that, and I'll lead into my next comment is that in the 1970s, the Dream of Nunavut was created because exploration was occurring before communities had a chance to respond or say yes or no. And here we are 45 years later in the exact same boat. So it's like, what was won in that argument? That was the Dream of Nunavut and the reason why it all started, in the conversation started in the first place. In effect, the grandfathered lands, any infrastructure that is created, including roads associated with all grandfathered rights, will be allowed even in the limited use areas that have been identified by the people in front of you and by collared data that is provided by the government of Nunavut. So there is scientific and IQ that is providing data towards the limited use areas that have been created in this draft land use plan. We heard yesterday that roads are disruptive to caribou. That was confirmed. The Government of Canada, in their filing, have stated that other regulatory tools can fill the gaps. None of these regulatory tools, including the Nunavut Impact Review Board, can manage cumulative impacts. How can the Government of Canada expect cumulative impacts to be managed in the absence of a strong Nunavut land use plan?
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry, when you're ready.
Huyunami Tivotali, Amalutan Apelsoto Hilu. In reference to where we're in the 70s compared to now, as I mentioned previous, in respect of sort of the preamble of the Nunavut Agreement and in recognizing James Itulu and Tagak Curley, we wouldn't be here today without the Nunavut Agreement. This is an amazing forum where Inuit and the Crown co-manage through the Institute of Public Government, the Nunavut Planning Commission, and with everyone around the table, it's our opportunity to share our views, our concerns, and for me, as a representative of the government in Canada, I look forward to these discussions and I look forward to the discourse and the ambiguities and see what we can do to work together to take the best path forward. And similarly, when it comes to listing any species at risk, we want to do it right. We have to follow procedure. We have to follow the steps. We have to ensure that we are accurate. We have to make sure that Inuit Hayumi Tuhangit is being taken into, along with the scientific aspects, and to ensure that we are making that correct decision. And it could take some time, as I mentioned earlier. It could take up to 2 years. Amazing opportunity as well through the land use planning and the current draft in its form. But at the same time, we can't necessarily rely solely on one process and discard another process. We have to do it in conjunction and together. And I think that would be the best approach. For the purposes of the historical decline in the population of the caribou, the government is very aware of it. The government is working with the appropriate organizations, the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board and Inuit. And as we go through this process of developing the final Nunavut-wide land use plan, and what considerations go into the final recommendation, be it protection of habitat in Nunavut. I reiterate that there are a number of different ways, and those protection decisions are made in a co-management context. The Nunavut Land Use Plan, once finalized, is a tool based in Nunavut's co-management system that could contribute to conserving and managing caribou in Nunavut. If barren ground caribou are listed in Canada, Government of Canada will work with co-management partners to identify critical habitat as defined in the Species at Risk Act, and then afterwards determining how to protect it as required by the Species at Risk Act. So when I first presented, one size does not fit all, and particularly sometimes procedures are not the be-all, end-all. But what we want is a very comprehensive approach and process to ensure that decisions are being made taking into account everything that is before us.
Thank you. There's still an opportunity for registered participants to ask questions. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Paul Kaluk, World Wildlife Fund. I'm here as representative. First of all, I have a question for the federal government. As we all know, as Indigenous people of this Canada, and they have their way of governing and dividing the territory at times. The people in the communities have voiced their needs. They want to see this come to pass. Community representatives here, I wish that they be told what they came here to hear, which would be positive from participants such as federal government, someone who will not keep the people from wanting to control their own land, including their food security. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry.
Yeah. Goeiemiddag te vote league. I'm going to Paul.
I think I'll answer on behalf of the federal government as one of their employee. We are here to listen to the community representatives. That's our intent for being here. What the concerns are related to harvesting and other interest groups, RIOs, NTI, Nunavut Wildlife Management Board, and other organizations, Inuit in the communities. How can they be heard? How can Inuit IQ relate to today's modern society for accomplishment of many organizations, Nunavut aspirations for your concern? We've heard it. That gives us direction, a proper response to what this proceeding is about, how the planning should shape, looking at the maps and other concerns represented by organizations. We are here. We hear you. We are here to gather information in relations to how things should shape, including wildlife, for the people of Inuit and Nunavut.
The government of Canada is here to listen, and we are participating in this process in developing the final territorial-wide Nunavut land use plan. And we're getting close. And we hope that once we get to the final approval stage and that there's an actual land use plan, obviously it comes from Nunavummiut, the participation of Inuit from the communities, and that it's a comprehensive land use plan at the end of the day, and that it involves all partners, and that it's going to be an amazing tool, in our opinion, once we get to that point. And it's something that I think will be a great example to uphold.
Thank you. Paul, a follow-up, please.
Thank you, Chair Paul, World Wildlife Fund. I asked the same questions to Nunavut Incorporated and federal government as well. all the parties should be able to make an agreement. And I've heard from the delegates, some of them are real concerned, even with their emotions. It just seems to be push aside. We are not making much progress with many people intervening how this land claim draft land use plan should be. The planning process should be able to progress well, with the feeling from the community members in the regions that were participating. It appears that many organizations are more for the rock rather than the people of Nunavut. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question, Paul. Some time back, I had an employment with Kekatani Inuit Association in Iqaluit. I think it was about 20 years ago that I spent time with her. For an example, Nunavut Agreement 8.3.11 talks about for
8.3.11, just as an example, it's a very clear clause, and it states, in the event that the proposed Katannilik Territorial Park is not established prior to the date of ratification of the agreement, so that's the Katannilik Park north of Gimilut, south of Iqaluit, between Iqaluit and Gimilut. The DIO, designated Inuit organization, shall have the right to acquire as Inuit-owned lands in the form described in subsection 1921B, which is surface only, any or all of Inuit-owned lands identification parcels LH-25K, LH used to be Lake Harbor, LH-25K01 and LH-25N01 as shown on the maps, two maps titled Inuit Lands Identification Parcels on deposit with the registrar in exchange for an equal amount of Inuit-owned lands within the South Baffin land use region as defined in Schedule 19.3. In plain language, Inuit in Gimilut tried to obtain lands that was in the proposed Katannilik Territorial Park. But that was before the land claim was ratified. So the government came back and said, well, if we're trying to establish a territorial park here, if it's not established after ratification, then we'll make those lands available to you again, if you want, but in exchange for an equal amount of Inuit-owned lands. To swap lands. This was brought forward to the government of Canada and the government of the Northwest Territories at the time in 1995, saying that the Inuit in Gimilut wanted to exercise that right identified in this clause that I just read, and that Inuit in Gimilut wanted those lands because the park itself was not established. That was in 1995. it took close to 20 years for surveyors to get on the ground, survey the areas in question, and then do the trade. And I understand where the questioner is coming from, and I understand the perspective of the title holders, Nunavut Dungavik Incorporated, and the Kivalliq Inuit Association, that if they have concerns about the limited use areas being on Inuit-owned lands that they have title to, and if there is that concern, to consider maybe a swap. But based on experience, that could take a long time. So I recommend that we continue down this process of seeing what we can do to work towards finalizing the draft Nunavut Land Use Plan, look at limited use areas, designations, mixed use areas, look at the concerns of what's being brought forward by the actual title holders, take into consideration community members and Inuit, and see where we can go to advance and move forward and get a Nunavut land use plan.
Thank you. Another question, Paul? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned things take time. All Nunavut areas have been designated. And it's pretty simple what the land parcels Inuit want or designate or rezone. And your answer is not what I wanted to hear. I just wanted to hear what we can do with land parcels, and I don't think I was answered to that question. Draft land use plan hearing organizations, I think it's feeling that the door should be wide open, and this plan wasn't looking forward to these response. Mining companies, exploration companies, marine traffic is increasing, and bulk fuel oils carriers are getting larger. The communities in our Nunavut are not prepared at all. Suppose there was an oil spill. Is there a contingency plan to be there just in case an eventuality comes around?
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm not in disagreement. I just wanted to provide an example.
Length of time it may take. We're always open to options, and it's a determination between the title holders and the government in Canada, and it's something that would probably require side discussions and long periods of time back and forth. But that wasn't a no response. That wasn't a no response. As to the current question, And I apologize, Mr. Chair, Terry Oda, Crown Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs Canada. Again, I would like to thank Paul for the question. We want to make sure that the best decisions are being made and that Inuit are involved through the whole process, and that every possible perspective is taken into account. And the questioner alluded to sort of the increase in activity. With respect to mineral tenure in good standing, going back to 2001, there were 146 permits, 3,010 claims, 271 leases. At its high point, 2004, we had 1,875 permits and 10,138 claims and 271 leases. Fast forward to 2021, we had 112 permits, 2,373 claims, and 568 leases. So there's somewhat of a downward trend in activities. Granted, we have close to three major project proponents, Baffinland, Agnico Eagle. But now that we have the Nunavut Agreement, there's more certainty and clarity with respect to the Government of Canada's role, the Inuit of Nunavut, their role, the co-management institutions. And what we want to do is to ensure that we capture Inuit concerns from the communities in the decision-making process. And the Nunavut Agreement really helps to do that. So we are always here to listen and to gather information to the best of our abilities, to gather the best information out there, and to ensure that right decisions are being made when it comes to any project activity in Nunavut. And just going through this process of the land use planning, which I feel is very good, and that it does capture a lot of the concerns and issues within the communities. Call me an optimist or someone that thinks that things are going in the right direction when it comes to engaging Nunavummiut. And I think, we are doing the right steps and the proper procedures to get to that point. I hope that somewhat responds to the question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Another question, Paul?
Thank you, Chair Paul Galik. I asked about bulk fuel delivery, where they become very busy where the mining companies are. I asked what would happen if there was an oil spill, and this will be my final question. And I was part of the negotiating for land claims. I have been there. The planning for the land appears to be the best option, how our land will be shaped. for the best of our future. The will is there to the people. The will should be there as well to others. So our proceeding here is indicating that we are making progress, and other organizations are so busy with their own priorities. What if this was not approved or approved? And there were complaints too that people are notified after the fact that everything is there for companies to work. And we have heard from different organizations who are able to work and also concerned where the caribou migration routes are, where the camping grounds are. So, where do you stand? Thank you, Chair.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Your question, Paul. We did not answer the question related to bulk fuel delivery. J.D. DeHart will answer your question. First,
I'll reiterate what's on the Nunavut Planning Commission website. In accordance with the Nunavut Planning and Project Assessment Act and the Nunavut Agreement, the Commission determines if projects are in conformity with applicable land use plans and determines whether a project that conforms to the plan or that has received a minor variance or ministerial exemption, as the case may be, is exempt from screening or requires screening due to cumulative impact concerns. So through the Nunavut Planning Commission, and once we finalize the Nunavut Land Use Plan, cumulative impacts concerns are going to be included within the fold of determination and decision making. And I have full confidence in the process. And I feel that when it comes to cumulative impacts, the Government of Canada, to the best of its current abilities, does try and take that into account when it makes its decision making as well. But once we have the Nunavut Land Use Plan, it'll be an amazing tool to use for our purposes as well. And to reiterate that in my previous statements as to, the one-size-fits-all and the be-all, end-all, we also have to have confidence in the other institutions of public government, the Nunavut Water Board, the Nunavut Impact Review Board, the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board, and those processes and procedures. Right now, I believe and I feel that there is very good Inuit representation, as well as really good working relations with both levels of government, the Government of Canada, the territorial government, and Inuit, as well as the Nunavut Dungavik Incorporated and the regional Inuit associations. So far so good, but obviously we never get it perfect the first time around, and that'll be the case with what we probably get finalized for a Nunavut land use plan. And we will have time and opportunity to make improvements as time goes by as well. So I'll leave the response at that, but with the permission of the chair, J.D. Johar can respond to the oil spill aspect of things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Once you answer the question, we will be taking a break, but there will be a chance for further questions. Just to let everybody know. So please provide your answer, and then we will break. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jaideep Johar, Transport Canada. Oil spill, ship-based pollution is taken very seriously. We have a prevention, preparedness, and a response regime in place. Prevention is key to reduce any oil spills. The vessels are required to be constructed, especially the oil tankers, with double hull, providing extra protection. There are specific requirements to have certified and qualified personnels, especially when operating in Canadian Arctic and in ice conditions. With regards to the equipments or the preparedness in this area, I'm aware that vessels either provide oil to the petroleum division or to the mine sites. Petroleum division and the mine sites are required to have oil pollution emergency plan in place as required by our regulations, including spill response equipments. We review these plans for compliance. We also inspect these facilities to ensure that they are complying with what is written in the plan. With regards to the ships, they need to have spill response equipments in place and procedures how to deploy them and use them. In case of a spill, it's the first responsibility of the polluter to ensure that spill is contained and cleaned. Same time, Canadian Coast Guard will be monitoring the spill cleanup and, if required, can take lead and have the equipments flown up near this area or outside this area or from the Canadian Coast Guard vessels to assist in cleanup. If further equipments are required, Government of Canada, Transport Canada, Coast Guard will look at deploying spill response equipments from south of 60 as well. The intention is to make sure the impact of the spill is minimized. We also have our Transport Canada aircraft, which carries out regular surveillance of these waters and which has resulted in the polluters becoming aware. Also to note that there is zero oil discharge in the Arctic, and in case of any incident with oil pollution, we take it very seriously. We inspect, and then we will take appropriate enforcement action towards the vessel. Lastly, it would be beneficial to know for all the community members that there are funds available for spill compensation, which could be utilized by the community members. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We will take a break. Is there a way that we can shorten it? Or should we will have a 10-minute break, and we do have another registered participant that wants to ask, and it will be Clayton because he's already been to the mic. Thanks. And just one quick questions on the land use plan and the presentation. And let's go. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clayton Tufta, Inlet Wildlife Board. The Government of Canada has historically and continues to oppose exploration and development in the calving grounds of the porcupine herd, whereas for the Nunavut land use plan, the Government of Canada basically recommends that the land use plan create a framework to allow projects with existing rights to proceed. Can the Government of Canada explain why there is a discrepancy in its position on calving grounds for the porcupine herd and our herds?
Thank you. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question as well.
Terry Audla,
Terry
Crown
Audla,
Indigenous
Crown Indigenous
Relations, Northern Affairs, Canada. Canada does support habitat protections for caribou in Nunavut. The Nunavut land use planning process is identifying what that looks like and what considerations go into a final recommendation. Protection of habitat in Canada can be made a number of different ways, and those protection decisions in Northern Canada are made in a co-management context. Co-management for the porcupine caribou herd is established from the Inuvialuit Settlement Agreement and is also based on domestic and international agreements. The Nunavut Land Use Plan is a tool based in Nunavut's co-management system that could contribute to conserving and managing caribou in Nunavut. If barren ground caribou are listed in Canada, Government of Canada will work with co-management partners to identify critical habitat as defined in the Species at Risk Act, and then afterwards determining how to protect it, as also required by the Species at Risk Act. And once the Nunavut Land Use Plan itself has been finalized and approved by all parties, then obviously that would be the direction we will take as well. I hope that answers the question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. A follow-up? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clayton Duck, Inlet Wildlife Board. When Environment and Climate Change Canada presented the recommendation to the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board, a recommendation was made that the Government of Canada use the Nunavut land use planning process to create a management plan that included protected areas. Being that you're saying that this is a process that you guys are going to be taking into consideration, can the Government of Canada explain how it's going to be taking those recommendations from the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board meeting into consideration?
Thank you. Please go ahead when you're ready.
The Government of Canada does support protection measures. And as I responded previously, The recommendations stemming from the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board to the Government of Canada are being taken into consideration right now, as I mentioned earlier. And once they provided, say, the recommendation on the barren ground caribou herd, then that'll be as well taken into consideration. But the one thing that we need to understand that it does take a 2-year time frame at minimum to ensure that the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board, KWB, Keewatin Wildlife Board, community members are participating throughout that whole process and are included, and that their voices are being heard. Once again, once the land use plan has been approved and finalized, that's another tool that we'll be using as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clayton Duck, Kivalliq Wildlife Board. Can the Government of Canada commit to closing parcels in the calving grounds and key access corridors until the land use plan is completed?
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry.
Thank you, Chair.
And again, we did have that same request put into letter form back in 2016 to the minister, and we did provide a response to that. We'll make sure to include that in the records for the commission as part of the response. And then at the same time, when it comes to establishing moratoriums, closing off parcels of land, in this case specifically to Crown lands, we want to ensure that the decision is sound, and in order to do that, we need to work with our partners to see what the best approach would be. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Another question, Clayton? Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clayton Duck, Kivalliq Wildlife Board. Can the Government of Canada commit to including the public in the post-hearing process that you request to the NPC? With the only parties that you stated that you would like included in that were the signatories and the regional Inuit associations.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry.
Thank you, Terry
Chair.
Odla, Crown
Terry
and
Odla.
Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs Canada. Yes, we want an open process, and we want to ensure and include Inuit from the communities in that decision-making process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clayton Duck, Kivalliq Wildlife Board. Final question. Can the Government of Canada explain in detail how they fulfill their duty to consult on projects in multiple stages, in all the various stages of exploration and development?
Thank you. Please go ahead, Terry. It is also something that could be provided in writing.
Thank you, Chair.
I agree, especially when the question, Terry Odla, Crown Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs Canada. And thank you to Clayton for the question. In detail, we'll provide that in written form, but in summary, the duty to consult and to accommodate rests with the Crown. The Crown relies on a regulatory process in discharging parts of the duty to consult. With respect to the Nunavut Land Use Plan, the Nunavut Planning Commission has the responsibility to prepare the draft plan and conduct public hearings, and the Crown relies on the Commission's process as the primary venue for interveners and the public to provide comments and raise concerns to assist with discharging the procedural aspects of the Crown's duty to consult. The Nunavut Agreement and the Nunavut Planning and Project Assessment Act outline the Commission's responsibility to prepare and revise the draft plan based on public feedback, based on the community's feedback, including written and oral submissions, and during these hearings. During the public proceedings, the Commission has the responsibility to take into account any comments brought forward, including those made by Inuit with respect to potential impacts, the draft plan, that the draft plan may have on asserted or established Section 35 rights, and to revise the draft plan accordingly. I'll leave it at that, and for the remainder, for any further detail, we'll provide that to the Commission. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there any other registered participant that would like to ask a question? I don't see any. And the last on the list is a public member. I don't see a public member. Thank you very much for your presentation yesterday and answering questions today. I was just going to say, World Wildlife Fund, you get ready to go. Yes, Terry.
Yeah. I'm the bad guy that you mentioned yesterday where I have to catch a flight this afternoon, so I won't be here for the closing, but I will have my officials remaining for any closing statements as well. But I would like the opportunity to thank everyone around the table and to remind everyone in Inuktitut matuingat tiak tugun tusago majugu ilitinni
we were happy to be participant in this proceeding. And thank you once again, Nunavut Planning Commission and community delegates for traveling to this community, and Rankin Inlet for your hospitality. And you have a good trip home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like you're ready. Please go ahead when you, at your pleasure. I am not able to. Hey.
Thank you, Chair Paul Kaluk, for Wildlife Fund. I work out of Iqaluit office. I work with Jason Hiroshima. We'll be at the table together. First of all, thank you to the community members sitting here. From Baffin Island, I grew up in that area. I grew up eating caribou and other wildlife. We are in full support, and what you're doing, and sometime I go hunting with you when I'm in your community. You feed your community as harvesters when you can. Thank you very much for that. I was asked, I am 58 now. I think I'm aging, but I remember as a youngster when I traveled with my parents seal hunting, and it appears just like yesterday. I remember it well. And when we got back to our community, Pangnakto, my parents held a feast for the community due to abundant harvest. And they taught that when you harvest and when you are successful, you always share what you harvest. And that is what I grew up with. I know it's not that easily today to harvest caribou, and I am in very much favor of caribou returning. So that's my opening statement where I am from. The people I work with who are always there to help me, and Nunavut in Nunavut we have an office in Iqaluit, and we use many resource people to work and what our goals are. I appreciate where they send me to different communities to gather information and what is the best solution to work with our fellow Inuit. We are here available to the company when requested and when need to assist. This region, I have been to every community except for but we have not been able to travel to Coal Harbor for travel difficulties, weather, and many other things. And this summer during our tour, and our aircraft was abruptly canceled, so we were not able to reach your community. But I have been to every community in this region, We know we don't take this land use planning lightly. We are here to support and seek information so we can fully participate what the outcome would be. I know what Inuit have in heart. there are many other issues in partnership with and what is respect on and how to balance the needs of everybody within Nunavut. And we are here to assist whenever needed for the betterment of Nunavut in any way we can. We are concerned with our fellow Inuit, the inhabitants, and caribou is very important. Many of you are concerned about the caribou, so are we. And the plan as it is, we are in support of it. We are concerned and will support the calving ground, post-calving grounds, and the freshwater caribou crossing should be protected and still within Nunavut ice crossing routes. They are the routes of many caribous migrating, and we know in Nunavut our caribou are going through very tough times. The herd is declining, and this should be our indication how and what we should do to prevent this from completely going. They're our main food source. Our support for these species with you will never cease. We need a future. We need this in our lifestyle. It would be helpful to everybody if we all pay attention to the Nunavut draft land use plan. Perhaps it doesn't look very important to many organizations. And going back to the caribou again, we hear that they migrate, they change path, but we all know that they have a habit of coming back to their calving grounds because the vegetation, the fauna is there for their feeding purposes. We should know where these areas are and support it. And we all should pay attention to the migration routes of the caribou. And we all know from history their land, their traditional land. Once you leave it up to someone else to decide how it should be designated, we are in trouble. And I think this is coming to the pass. What are you taking to safeguard these mammals? And the caribou habitat, we don't encounter many ice crossings in this region, but elsewhere that ice crossing area should be strengthened during fall and spring migration. We want these ice crossing areas to be protected, and the caribou will skip to the next one. We like to be able to make a rational presentation will see walrus hollowed. We all know that they are very important where their habitat is. We also are asking these areas be protected so they'll be available as food source to many Nunavut people. And we need to have these hollowed as protected and not to be disturbed much as possible. And we know these hollouts are always there yearly for the herd to come back and to calve. We ask that you pay attention to these hollouts and protection be in place for these walrus hollouts. We have prepared what would be the best to protect the walrus herds. I am concluding my presentation soon. And we also heard of the importance, and we have real no knowledge of this in the communities. Our fellow Inuit are starting to think and come up with that their fishing areas where they spawn each year, the rivers are being damaged, so there is a need for the protection area of the fishing rivers. Sometimes people use these fishes for personal and commercial reasons, so these rivers identify or were mentioned needs to be protection. And we all know where these are the spawning grounds, especially, are very important and should be protected. We try to participate, gathering information, hearing different opinions. How can we move forward together? The planning process will enable us. Perhaps it will be good for. It is good for all of us as Inuit. Once we are together, we are able to beat any obstacle that's ahead of us. You are working well. Work together. Keep going. I wish that we all of us as organization can work together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your presentation. As with all, we will work through our questions, and Nunavut Planning Commission staff. No questions from the staff. I open the floor to the community delegates, and as before, we'll make a quick list. So I'll go down the side. John has a question. Go down this side. Alex. As previous, please make the question to the presentation. And go ahead, John.
Thank you, Chair. John L. Tinaslu, Hunters and Trappers, Nauyat, and Paul with Nunavut Wildlife Fund. Thank you for your presentation. We have heard many presenters on different topics. Some never fully answer what our questions are too many times. when community concerns are asked, there are really have never answers, although we have great sentiment for caribou herd. They're mammals, breathing beings. Suppose or not if it's approved or not. Too many things we don't understand, but assisting in any way you can, it gives us a lot of information other than from one source. I don't have many questions, but I like to say when we heard that you will be part of the presenters of the World Wildlife Fund, I was pretty glad to see this organization on the list. I care for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the future. Asking questions has no harm as Canadians, and everything is moving so fast. Especially when we discuss caribou calving grounds and exploration and mining companies. The presenters have opened the gate for mining companies to the calving grounds. They are very busy in this region, and the old mines from the past and polluting our waters from their waste. They are being neglected for cleanup, and when we mention this, and it's the only time when organizations showed interest. The oil mining companies, their damage and mess to the land, we are very concerned about that. Is it because it doesn't matter to Kablunak, and should Inuit only be affected by what could be cancer-causing elements? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. A lot of that was a comment, but if you would like to say something to that, Paul, please. No? Okay. It's Alex. Please go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. I'll be very brief.
I'll be very brief. Alex Isaluk, Hunters and Trappers Organization, Akbiet. It's a awakening call from your short presentation, Paul. What we are able to do, especially in relations to calving grounds. Thank you, Paul, for your support in your presentation. My second is more like a comment. Harvesters of Akbet, over the past 20 years, we are both harvesters of marine, seals, beluga, and other mammals are also our food source. Every year, whatever is harvested by the harvesters, we have programs to determine, say for instance for beluga whale, what condition they are in now, and other mammals as well, bearded seal, ring seal. All of our food source every year are examined to see what kind of health they are in now. So I'll say this, they're not in danger right now, but there's always a but. We are starting to find out that PCBs and mercury are in the liver of many mammal we ate. They're not really there yet, but they are starting to show evidence these chemicals are in. We are near the treat area from southern Canada, forest fires. Forest fires seems to be the ones creating these chemicals coming into to the sea mammals. And the clouds, vapors fall into the marine mammal sanctuary water. We are slowly learning over the past 20 years what is becoming to our harvested mammals. As for the caribou, I think it's time that we start having research on caribou to see if these same chemicals are starting to affect the caribou.
Thank you. And it does sound like a comment, but okay. Go around the table again. Any hands up for questions? Okay, we'll have one from Willie, one from Paula, and Eva. Once again, questions to the presentation and the land use plan. Please go ahead, Willie.
Thank you, Chair. Willie Nicolak, Mayor, Hamlet of Coral Harbor. You mentioned that you've been trying to get to Coral Harbor. Will you make any further attempt to arrive?
Please go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Chair.